Then we come to Irving Goffman, who looked at face-to-face interaction and small-scale social contexts, and he was famous for his concept of dramaturgical analysis, that is to look at society and social action as though we are all performing as actors on a stage, like what Shakespeare said, all life is a stage, all the world's a stage. So he was interested in the concept of we are putting on a front stage face, and we try to hide our backstage behaviors, what he called impression management, because we all want to put our best face forward. And especially in today's social media infested era, all the more we have things like Instagram, where you can put your best photos forward. But the amount of editing that goes behind the scenes, of course, is invisible to the audience. So dramaturgical analysis was a theory of action that uses the example of drama in a theatre to examine people's abilities to present particular images of themselves to others in their interaction. Just like your favorite actor or actress plays a role on TV, but they're not the same person behind the scenes. People aim to create a particular impression or image of themselves in the eyes of others, and this image can change depending on the person's motivation. So what they call two-faced or many-faced. For example, a banker officer by day, very professional, but a great dancer and clubber at night. So you see two different sides of the same person. So the social process is an interplay of action and reaction, in which each actor interprets and responds to other actors. So a mutually defined social situation or consensus only happens when both the social actor and their audience around them accepts the definition of the situation. For example, stepping on someone's shoe, the person who did it could apologize, and the other person accepts the definition of the situation as an accident, and they say, don't worry about it. Likewise, we can talk about the internet, whereby someone posts a picture. Maybe it's a very heavily edited picture on Instagram, but the audience is willing to accept that reality. So mission accomplished. So this perspective was inspired by Durkheim and also Mead. So Goffman used phenomenology to understand how individuals perceive the interactions around them, which they might also participate in, especially in his famous book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, very much everyday defined as well. Goffman used a dramaturgical approach. And I have this lecture on manga, or Malaysian manga, as a dramaturgical stage for analyzing society, which I could share with you in another lecture video. So this approach is based on the theatre, where individuals learn their roles through the process of interaction. Roles here are sets of expectations which others have of our behavior. So that's why they use the term role play. When talking about the front stage, it is the part of an individual's performance which functions in a consistent way to define the situation for the audience or observers. It provides the setting, appearance, and manner for the social role. And through socialization, that is how individuals learn how to play with these roles, and thereby creating their front through the use of norms and values. Testing. So moving on to Suet, who believe in uncovering the content and form of everyday interpersonal experiences of the social world. Suet was concerned with testing how Weber's typology of social action is possible. If we recall, Weber outlined 4 different types of meaningful social action. So Suet was trying to analyze how these meanings became attached to those social actions in the first place, in a way that could result in a particular typology, where you have rational legal action, traditional action, affective action, and value rational action. For Suet, the research question was, how could these types of social action be justified philosophically in order to do sociological research? How do we know for sure that all these actions are limited, and that's why they're classified in that way? Suet supported Weber in his belief that social sciences was not the same as natural sciences, but that we could still use an ideal type as a measurement device. And Schutz also pointed out that when choosing one experience out of many to interpret, so for example, we could have a whole bunch of dreams that we had, but we only choose to tell one of them. Or there's so many events that happen in a day, and you only write some of them in your blog or your diary or on Facebook or Twitter. That itself involves your interpretation, whereby you choose one event out of many as the most significant one. So in a way, this was a critique of Weber, since Weber only addressed one level of interpretation. So if you've watched the movie Inception, you recall that they tried to plant dreams within dreams. And not only do you have to understand the first level of dreams, you have to go deeper and deeper. So Schutz was talking about the same thing, but applied to our interpretation and understanding of daily events. He was also influenced by Husserl, the mathematician, who coined the term phenomenology. But he turned the Husserlian account of temporality, means being fixed in one particular point at time, into the direction of an action theory, that is to focus on social action rather than social structure. Schutz differentiated different levels of passive experience. So there is the kind of action that are bodily reflexes, spontaneous activity without a guiding project. For example, we blink our eyes when it's too bright and all those kinds of things. And deliberately planned and projected activity, known technically as action, like speaking, shaking hands, writing a book. However, towards the end of his career, he criticized Husserl's account on how the other, remember the significant other, person, comes to appear in our consciousness. So if you've ever heard the term or the phrase, you can't be in two places at the same time, here's where Schutz came in, because he explored the meaning of one's biographical situation, one's body, and the ontological constraints of space and time, or spatial-temporal considerations, that prevented one from being at certain places at certain times. And now we come to the famous ethnomethodologists, Garfinkel and Zicurel. So of course, just like the other individualist theorists, they were against Parsons' and other structural functionalists' conception or ontology of the way people behave, in which they seem to be cultural dopes or puppets. Because in the structural functionalist perspective, the assumption is that people are just tools who are influenced by the social structure, and everything we do is based on that. So Garfinkel and Zicurel stress autonomy of the individual, and they believe that the objective reality of everyday life is something that people struggle to achieve through their practical actions. So objective reality is not something that everyone experiences in a similar way. It's really something that we have to filter through our minds and make sense of based on our experiences. And therefore, that's why they use the term struggle over here. So in accounting for their own actions and others' actions, people continually create and recreate their social world. So it's like a web page that refreshes itself every time there is new information. So people's accounts of their social reality are never complete. It's always a work in progress. They always leave something implicit or taken for granted. For example, every single time I meet you, I shouldn't have to introduce my name all over again because we have met before and we know each other. So if you watch like movies like 500 Days of Summer, it's about a situation in which there's a couple in which the girl has amnesia and she can't remember the boyfriend. So every single time they meet, she has to introduce herself or ask him to introduce himself all over again. So we don't have to do that because we already take for granted that we have been introduced to each other. And every day we learn something new about the people around us. So people rely on their audiences sharing a background of assumptions that allow them to fill in the gaps for themselves. As mentioned, we know each other's names, we know who we are, and we can continue from where we left off in the previous conversation. And that's how we understand what is being said. So an important part of this taken for granted background is a sense of social structure that people use to interpret and account for the actions of others. People explain actions by showing that they are exactly the kinds of things that people in that situation would do. During COVID-19, perhaps in the beginning, in January 2020, it would be very strange to see anyone wearing a mask. But after 1 year, it becomes something that's commonplace, even wearing 2 masks. So these interpretative processes are not normally visible because it goes on in our minds. So how do we know what people are thinking about? So ethnomethodology hence tries to uncover them, to demonstrate what is really going on in the routine activities of everyday life. And so even Garfinkel and Zickerell are inspired by Schutz. Garfinkel criticized the structural functionalists who believed individuals had almost no autonomy in making decisions. They're almost like dolls or puppets. So he believed that we cannot just interpret social action. We need to go one level deeper and understand not just the meanings of social action, but also the methods that people use to organize their interactions and judging reality. Just imagine you're cleaning your house and you're organizing everything, things that go in the kitchen, things that go in the bathroom. So we also organize our experiences in the same way. So what Garfinkel tried to do was to test out people's common sense. He did this by doing something called breaching experiments. He tried to test his theories using conversations, whereby he took what we usually take for granted and tried to test them. He tried to break up people's conception of reality. So he got his students in a class to deliberately behave in strange ways to test people's reactions. For example, one documented conversation that Garfinkel got his students to do was to get a victim or a so-called person that we'll be having a conversation with. So the victim or the friend waved his hand cheerily and asked the student, "How are you?" And so the student asked in response, "How are you?" And the experimenter actually replied and said, "How am I in regard to what? My health, my finances, my schoolwork, my peace of mind? What do you mean by how are you?" So the person, the victim, obviously got flustered and embarrassed, red in the face and suddenly out of control, and said, "Look, I was just trying to be polite. I don't really care how you are." So the purpose of this is to actually test what people take for granted, like we always ask each other, "Sudah makan? Have you eaten? How are you?" And we don't really expect a very serious response because it's just a greeting. It's like one way of saying good morning. So what Garfinkel got his students to do was to kind of respond in a very bizarre way and to ask, "What do you mean by how are you?" And then that's when the conversation broke down. So that is how people react when their common sense is being questioned. And that shows how we take things for granted. So in looking at the social construction of reality, originally this was meant to be a collaboration between 3 sociologists and 2 philosophers. So you have here Berger and Luckman, and their main objectives were to define the task of the sociology of knowledge. How do we know things? And to broaden its scope. At the core of this study is the dialectical nature of the relationship between man and society, in the sense that humans are all part of society, and yet we are also influenced by society in return. So Berger and Luckman rejected the notion that cultural variability is determined by genetic nature. So it's more towards nurture and not nature. And for them, language plays a crucial role in maintaining social reality and individual identity. So Berger and Luckman also used phenomenological ideas to investigate the taken for granted reality that people construct in response to the reactions of others. They focus on the way that we all take things around us as natural, inevitable, and taken for granted in our everyday world, our everyday defined realities. So this taken for granted reality is objective, but also could be subjective, and has a Durkheimian social fact quality, because if that person takes it as something objective and fixed, then so it is. And with that said, the everyday world is a product of human subjectivity. An action is reified. This means making something real or given human attributes. Whenever people forget that it is actually a human product. For example, language. It's a social fact. It's created through human interaction over time, and we are all bound by the rules of language. And yet we can interpret language. We can change the meanings when we use slang. And we can say it's difficult, it's easy, it's nice, it's friendly. So we're giving human attributes to language, which is really a social fact. So like Weber, they stress that all social realities have to be studied from the perspective of the subjective meanings given to them by individual social actors. So Berger and Luckman are key developers of the second emphasis of the sociology of knowledge. And what they proposed as their theory was that our reality is socially constructed by the knowledge that we have. So what they meant was that social reality is not itself a social fact, but it's something that we produce, and we tell ourselves and each other that this is the truth, this is the reality. And so its meaning is derived in and through these systems of communication. It's like when you go on an internet forum and then people discuss, they start a thread and then there are replies and people debate, and then finally everybody comes to a kind of conclusion or compromise or something like that. So that's reality as defined by forumers. So they emphasize that humans are a product of society, and at the same time society is a product of humans. And there are 3 steps in the social construction of reality. The first is externalization, the ongoing outpouring of human beings into the world, both in the physical and the mental activity of people. The second is objectivation, attainment by the products of this activity, both physical and mental, of a reality that confronts its original producers as a fact external to and other than themselves, institutionalization. And the third is internalization, the reappropriation of humans of this same reality, transforming it once again from structures of the objective world into structures of the subjective consciousness through socialization. So it's like we first enter society in stage 1, and in stage 2 we recognize the social structures around us, mentally and physically, and in the third level we accept it, we change it a little bit, we redefine it, and then we inform other people by socializing them. So this construction of reality is called world maintenance. We need to maintain our social world in a stable sense. Because socially constructed worlds are precarious. It's like when you play a video game and then you forget to save your game, and then the next day you turn on your computer and oh no, everything's lost, and you have to start all over again. So it's something like that, to make it easier to imagine. So socially constructed worlds are precarious, constantly threatened by human self-interest. What is it? Stupidity and forgetfulness, and all these human failures or human weaknesses, therefore require world maintenance. And so there are 3 key processes in world maintenance: socialization, learning norms and values; social control, there needs to be rules and regulations; and legitimation, again, where we come to power. So legitimation here is second-order knowledge that explains and justifies the social order and answers the questions that we may ask of the meaning of life. Why are things done in this way? Why do we need to follow rules and things like that? So it could be as simple as proverbs. It's an informal sense of legitimation, like we say old wives' tales or older people, elders telling us not to go out and play at night in the past because there is no electricity, but they'll tell us that it's because there are things out there that we should fear. So proverbs or tales, folk tales and things like that. Second order knowledge that explains the social order around us. And therapy is also involved, where legitimations are used to keep actual or potential deviance. So in a way, these proverbs and folk tales are ways of passing down information to us about what might happen if things go wrong, if we don't behave ourselves according to social norms. So the reality of everyday life has a privileged position among different realities. Of course, we take what happens during the day when we are awake as more important than dreams or speculation. It appears ordered and independent of one's apprehension. It seems objective enough because supposedly everyone can see the same thing. Like a viral video, everyone sees the same thing and they can comment and debate about it. So one tool that provides the order for making sense of everyday life is language, because it is through language that we can define and speak about things and debate. The reality of everyday life presents itself as an intersubjective world, a world that you, as the observer, share with others. And the reality of everyday life also takes place in time, in a coercive temporal structure. Time is limited, and we have 24 hours in a day, and it already forms a kind of boundary or perimeter around us. So that's how we define when the day begins and when it ends. And the reality of everyday life is also shared with others. And the most basic and fully real form of this is the face-to-face conversation, where this interaction with other people is shaped by the typifications we use, our standard schemes of meaning, terms of reference, like you talk about popular culture, you talk about a song, a movie, a favorite place, favorite restaurant, favorite food, and things like that. So these typifications become more anonymous the further a person is from face-to-face interaction. So this may be a problem with social distancing. Hence, for Berger and Luckman, the social structure is the sum total of all these typifications, all our common sense pooled together and shared, and of the recurrent patterns of interaction established by means of them. As such, social structure is an essential element of the reality of everyday life. So ultimately, Berger and Luckman were not concerned with epistemological or methodological problems. Rather, the sociology of knowledge has to concern itself with everything that passes as knowledge in society. So in fact, they're questioning how knowledge comes to be knowledge in the first place. So that's why they were truly interested in knowing about how reality is defined in people's everyday life, or the social construction of reality.